All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Isabel Brador, and I am a program specialist here with CCDI. I work alongside the rest of the team to support our awardee recipients, and that includes, as Olivia mentioned previously, troubleshooting challenges and providing them with resources and guidance for completing their projects. I'm very excited to introduce CCDI's 2024 Higher Education Award recipients, who you'll be hearing from shortly. First, we're going to hear from Angelo State University, then Indiana University, and last but certainly not least, the University of Houston downtown. They've all been working very hard on their projects since December of last year, and they will continue to work on their projects until December of this year. After their presentations, there will of course be an opportunity to take questions from the audience, both virtual and in person. For our virtual audience, please feel free to enter any questions you might have in the Q&A on Zoom. And for those of you who are on site, again, we are asking that you please, if you can, make your way to the mics to ask your questions. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started.
All right, thank you very much. We are here representing Angelo State, and our project is All History is Local, celebrating the people of West Texas. Our project team includes Shannon Sturm, Assistant Director of Special Collections at the Porter Henderson Library's West Texas Collection, who's not able to be here. My name is Dr. Matt Gritter. I'm Associate Professor and Chair of the Department of Political Science and Philosophy. And I'm here with Aubrey Madler, who's our Executive Director of Library Services at the Porter Henderson Library. This just gives you a sense of where we are. We're in San Angelo, Texas. We're in the West Central Texas region. You can see in the terms of the way that the major cities work, you can see Austin is kind of over there, Houston is over there, El Paso is further to the west. So we're in a unique part of Texas, and we have a unique region that I think we really tried to tell a unique story. The Porter Henderson Library has been the lead on this project with campus partners, with faculty and students, and we also have our West Texas collection, which is our archive and our special collections unit, where a lot of the source material that we've used locally has come from. So that's been a real asset to work with. In terms of our project scope and purpose, so you can see we really want to give voice to West Texas area narratives. Our part of Texas traditionally has not had a lot of their stories being told at a larger level, and one of the things we really wanted to do is tell the stories of the people of West Texas, and then tie our local narratives to national themes using the digital resources of the Library of Congress. We've wanted to bring faculty and students together across campus, have faculty, students, even staff working together to come up with this project that really celebrates and provides an understanding of our community. And we wanted to create a unique teaching and learning tool. So that was one of the things that we really wanted to do. And we have been able to make progress in several areas. We hired student employees. Student employees come from a variety of backgrounds, people with political science, history majors, people in our College of Business, international students. So just a really diverse range of people have contributed to our project. We've also had 7 faculty from 4 departments across our university. And indeed, I think in my 12 years at Angelo State, this is really the most interdisciplinary, collaborative project that I've seen. We've been able to, I think, get quite a bit of our goals done. We've completed 5 articles, 5 more are in progress. And in July, we'll be holding a summer workshop. So our K through 12 educators will really be able to teach the stories of their own community. And I think that'll be very valuable because the local community, the local students and teachers will really be giving voice to their own stories. Alrighty, in terms of some of the stories and collections we've used for Latinx populations, we've looked at migrant workers, the segregation of education, we've looked at sports teams, we've looked at community leaders. For Black populations, we've looked at the Buffalo Soldiers, the segregation of education, sports teams and community leaders. And these are topics that we'll cover now and continue building on in the future, using the digital archives that the West Texas Collection has, stories from our own communities, and the Library of Congress of a whole. And this photo is a screenshot of a story currently in draft form, learning about Ava Communes Tucker. The previous slide had Ella Mae Johnson, who was a businesswoman, a community leader, and an activist. So we're really trying to tell these individual stories and then put them in a larger context. In terms of the research phase, we have 5 undergraduate students on our writing staff. They're English, history, and political science. The students meet as a group, they work in teams, and they work individually to research their assigned topics. We have a space in the West Texas collection for the students to collaborate, so they're able to talk to each other about some of the various challenges they're facing. In terms of using some of our Library of Congress digital collections, we've looked at the Chronicling America, the Print and Photographs online catalog, the Voices from the Dust Bowl, the Charles L. Todd and Robert Sunken Migrant Workers Collection, and the Farm Security Administration, the Office of War Information Photographed Collection. This has been rewarding to me as someone who's done a lot of research as the Library of Congress. And if you want to think about digital, I still take a terrible reader photograph, as I learned today. So some things never change. And I think I'm glad to be back as someone who's been doing research here since 2007. In terms of training and design, we also have a tech team, and they work with we selected Esri's ArcGIS software, which has helped us to meet the goal of telling local stories within broader narratives. So needing a tool that will allow us to build maps and really show kind of spatially and historically some of the experience we want to undertake. This story maps application helps to bring visual life and context to the narrative that our student researchers are drafting into stories that we'll be able to really tell to the community and beyond. 3 students and 1 faculty member make up the tech team. Thankfully, I am not really involved in the tech because that would not be a pleasant experience. And they help us make design decisions that incorporate custom maps, photos, captions, and various excerpts of text. The photo here is a screenshot taken from one of the stories where we're able to show just some of the community and larger connections that we've been working with. So now I would like to turn things over to my colleague, Dr. Madler, the director of the Porter Henderson Library, who will tell you the rest of our project and our progress.
Thank you, Dr. Gritter. I will continue to show you some more screenshots of what the tech side starts to look like as our students develop their stories. Our theme here is All History is Local, celebrating the people of West Texas. And like my colleague said, we're integrated the ArcGIS platform, and then we're also using the Hub application within that software, which helps to provide us that landing page where our users can go to start their research journey. So they'll land on this home screen, and then they can click into the different thematic collections there that are housing the specific stories. We developed a hierarchy that starts to bring some organization to the project, which has changed gears a few times as we talk about all the things that are out there and all the stories that there are for us to tell. But we did highlight a couple this past spring, as my colleague had mentioned, but then there are so many other stories that we'll continue with as the project progresses. So the thematic collections will be set up in such a way that they'll house those individual stories, and then the person can come into one of those stories and then see links out to other connected stories or the people that are highlighted within those narratives. So it helps the researcher to come at this information in a couple different ways. We also wanted to help people understand that even within one narrative, there are similar stories happening across different populations. So we started to see those commonalities take shape, which is how we came up with the idea to offer thematic entries into these stories in addition to the specific biographical stories that will feature specific people and places. So the second round, we'll get into some military stories, starting with World War II. And like Matt mentioned, there will be some stories about sports and how education became integrated instead of just segregated. So that's where we're headed. There's a lot of room for growth, and we look forward to seeing where the project will go. Our students learned a lot so far on this project. They're jumping in with us to make those decisions and really discover what this project could be as it starts to come to life. They're with us with change, and they're here asking questions. They're diving in and learning the technology themselves and learning from each other, so they're able to work together on these projects while also, of course, digging into the archives independently. We will eventually see many more stories featured within the hub and the different thematic collections and the individual story maps. There are plans to collaborate more with faculty where they'll bring it into their classrooms and even have class projects within the classes at Angelo State University where those stories could be contributed to the platform as well. So there's a lot of room here to grow, but we look forward to everything that this grant has provided us to do to get this launched, see what's possible, and help us to dive into the archives of the Library of Congress and understand how our local stories are found within the national narratives. Thank you.
Haleto, Chinkchokma, Sanno Chefoha, Brandy McDonald, Chickasaw Chatasaya. Hi, my name is Brandy McDonald. I am a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation with ancestral ties to the Choctaw Nation. I'm the executive director of the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology at Indiana University. And I have the gift to present with Kelsey today because one of our colleagues was unable to make it. So I'll pass the mic to Kelsey.
As Brandy stated, I'm Kelsey Grimm. Our project is Connecting Collections, Indigenous Identities in Edward S. Curtis and Joseph K. Dixon Materials. We're collaborating with 3 Indigenous artist curators to create a hybrid virtual and physical exhibit that connects collections found between the Library of Congress and Indiana University.
On this slide, you see some of the museum's team and our guest curators. Within the first photo that you see, our museum team, Camden, is the development and external communications manager. We also have Amelia, who is the project assistant, graciously funded by this grant. We also have Kelsey, who's a curator of archives and library resources, myself, and then we also have Abigail, who's unable to be here as the business manager.
Our invited guest curators for this exhibit are Deborah Yepa Papan, a contemporary multimedia artist who specializes in photography and digital collaging. She's co-founder and director of exhibitions and programs at the Center for Native Futures in Chicago. Melina Two Bulls specializes in beadwork, quilting, and handmade dolls. She's the founder of Melina's Lakota Beadwork and has mentored many Native artists within her community. Yadika Starr Fields is a painter, muralist, street artist, and community activist based in Oklahoma. As co-PIs on this project, Brandy and I have been reflecting on how we've unintentionally been upholding colonial power, thinking as an Indigenous woman not represented by these tribes, and me, a white woman, who both possess positions of power in this work. So as we go through this presentation, keep in mind the idea of shifting power dynamics. Many may be familiar with the Edward S. Curtis photographs created in the early 20th century and funded by J.P. Morgan to capture the, quote, vanishing race of Indigenous Americans and Native Alaskans. A similar expedition was taking place around the same time, led by Joseph K. Dixon and funded through the Philadelphia-based Wanamaker department store. Curtis's image, The Flight of Arrows, dated 1908, is here on the left, and Dixon's Song of the Arrows, dated 1909, is on the right, both taken in Montana. Both expeditions were funded by white men and populated with more white men. Curtis and Dixon used a very colonial lens, photographing and often posing the Indigenous peoples according to how whites stereotyped them. This process reinforced white supremacy and the othering of these recorded peoples. The Curtis photographs are found here at the Library of Congress, like at the water's edge on the left. The Dixon Wanamaker photographs and documents, like teepee's reflection in water on the right, are at the IU Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. And the wax cylinder recordings from both are at IU's Archives of Traditional Music. These collections are being used as inspiration for the grant exhibit. Though the initial creation of these materials was extractive and based in colonial practices, this project intentionally prioritizes the Indigenous curators' visions to redress colonial harm and uplift source community voices. Deborah, Melina, and Yadika are each making new artwork to display. For example, which we share with her consent, Deborah wants to, quote, decenter these white photographers and what they photographed, but instead take ownership of our images through our eyes, creating artwork about our people from us. Our first goal is to support the guest curators' needs as artists, researchers, and creatives to make their vision a reality. We're prioritizing Deborah, Melina, and Yatika's unique Indigenous perspectives, knowledges, and expertise by releasing curatorial control and shifting the paradigm to one of support. We chose to meet face-to-face in March. It's a very different experience being in the room with each other or gazing over video. We're financially compensating them with a monthly stipend, but not measuring that time or effort with an hourly wage. When connecting with the image collections, we warned of potentially harmful content, such as images of burials and ceremonies and derogatory metadata, for example. The next major goal is to connect with diverse audiences. We have a large touchscreen monitor, an iPad, and QR codes for museum visitors to access and experience the virtual exhibit. The virtual portion allows anyone across the country or internationally to access this project as long as they have an internet connection. We've also planned in-person programs and workshops to engage our local community, which we'll talk more about a little later. In March, as I mentioned, we hosted Deborah, Melina, and Yatika in Bloomington so they could handle the Dixon print photographs in person, which is pictured here. While we've digitally sent them images as well, we all know that handling physical versions impart different information just by seeing the original order, handwritten notations, and the differently processed duplicates. During the visit, our guest curators also visited the archives of traditional music to hear recordings from their home nations. We met with the university's Advanced Visualization Laboratory, who are helping bring the virtual exhibit to life, and enjoyed events with students and faculty at the First Nations Education and Cultural Center. Community is important. Being with each other and drawing inspiration from a singer's voice crack or a series of cloud studies feeds into the project. Following the face-to-face meeting, we met with an AVL team member to three-dimensionally scan an early 20th century camera. The camera is part of the IUMA collections and is similar to one that might have been used in the 1910s while taking these photographs. A series of high-quality pictures were taken in a photo box and then rendered to create what you see on screen. They shared this model with our team in Sketchfab, though the final virtual exhibit will be using Spatial. Find my slide.
So challenges. The challenges have mostly and primarily been administrative. And so we work in IU, which is a very large colonial institution with a lot of forms and systems and structures that don't always cater to needing things right away or to communities that don't fit within their box. So one of the first challenges that we had was during the onboarding the artist curators in our systems and paying them without an IU structured invoice system was not necessarily allowed. We initially wanted to pay honorariums every month versus submitting an invoice within the IU system and bringing them on as vendors. That system was not allowed, and so we ended up having to shift and pivot and bring them in as vendors and then start issuing invoices. This was quite challenging for our artist curators because they are very busy. They have other projects outside of our projects, and so creating an invoice plus going into the system was quite challenging. So that was a shift in our paradigm internally as a museum, where our business manager, Abigail Nipstein, now creates the invoices, makes sure that it aligns with what the artist would like it to say, and then we submit them internally for them to help not help their time, but also to get them paid in a timely manner, and so they don't necessarily have to worry every month about getting that check to them because they are doing the work. We're not here to micromanage the work. We trust that they're doing the work. Second was also thinking about what that looks like when we had to put them in the systems for vendors and also working to support them as vendors. A few of our artists they're rural, they're working on Indigenous reservations, and those addresses got kicked back by the IU system, and they said that they don't exist. Their homes on the reservation exist, right? And so that was something that we also leaned in with the administrative because the system said that they could not accept those addresses, but they could. And so it was really a conversation with the administration, having a larger conversation around colonial legacy and that really what Indigenous infrastructure looks like. And it was as simple as that person that we talked to, entering them themselves and pushing it forward. So the systems could do it, They just weren't built to be able to do it and to meet the needs of the indigenous artist curators or people outside of the standard Western concepts of what living infrastructure looks like. Lastly, we also would part of the grant, we receive funding to be able to support supplies. One of our artist curators wanted to buy deer hide, and so many times within our IU structure, you have to buy it from approved vendors that are on the list that have been vetted. There's not an approved vendor that issues out deer hide. And so that was also a larger conversation that what IU deems as an unusual material is not unusual to indigenous populations, that we are actively using deer hide. And so that was figuring out what is the system, how do we get this paid, how do we get these pieces of material shipped to the reservation so that this artist curator can continue to develop for the install of the exhibit. So moving forward, for our upcoming plans, I promised that I would follow the notes and not go rogue. So, so the exhibit will be installed in a high traffic area where staff, community, students are going to be walking through this area regularly, especially going to the lecture hall. Our goal is to get this exhibit and working with the curators, get it installed at the end of August when those classes are in session. We'll be doing a few edits here and there, FaceTiming with the artist curators until they are physically on site in October. We asked them what day they would like to come back, and they selected Indigenous Peoples Day, which is wonderful. So that's October 14th, and so we're going to do a celebration, which is our community program, because they wanted to do a program specifically for Indigenous faculty, community, and students at IU. So we have a special Indigenous preview on Indigenous Peoples Day with these Indigenous curators that is very specific to bringing them in and building community and seeing this exhibit first before anyone else, like from their perspective, right? And then we have a community center day the following day where we're inviting all of our community guest curators who worked on the other exhibits of the space on the 15th so that the curators can all get together and communities that helped build our opening. And then on that Friday, Homecoming Friday, we're gonna do our grand opening as well. We also were going to meet after this regularly, so in terms of November and December around the reporting time, to talk about how we can continue to build, not just to reflect on what went right, what went wrong, what are the areas of growth within our granting cycle, but really thinking about that this work, decolonizing collections, thinking about Indigenous rights and stewardship practices, this building community is longer than a grant cycle. And so what does it look like for us to continue to work together with them? I think that's it. Thank you, Yakoke. Very much, we appreciate you all.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yes? I'm just kind of short. Oh, yeah, let's see. Okay. Well, hello everyone. My name is Raquel Chiquillo, and I'm professor of Spanish at the University of Houston Downtown. And the name of our project is Discovering Afro-Latino Heritage, a reflective story map project to enhance student belongingness and learning. And I just wanted to introduce you to our grant team. It is a collaboration between 3 areas of the university: the Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence, the W.I. Dykes Library, and the Spanish area in the Department of Humanities, History, and Languages. I think it's actually History, Humanities, and Languages, so sorry, guys. And then we also opened up our grant to faculty to see if they wanted to work with us. So we have 5 faculty members that worked with us last semester, and it was a mixture from bilingual ed, Spanish, Latino studies, and English. So we were very happy to get an interdisciplinary group to work on this project with us and have their students do story maps as well. So the project came about because many of us in Spanish and in English were beginning to create Afro-Latino units in our classes, especially the literature and culture classes. But when we started to create them and wanted to put content into the classes, we found that there were huge gaps. There was very little content that was already made that was not racist and prejudiced or whatever, that we could use. And so we thought, okay, this is a good grant, let's apply for it, and let's see if we have to create our own content, right? And because we have to create a lot of content, we thought, well, let's get as many faculty members involved as possible, and staff members as well, so that we can all share it. So the idea is to share the story maps that were created with everybody, kind of a repository, and then use them in our classes for those units. A secondary goal was also to highlight our Afro-Latino student population at UHD and to let them see that we see them, that we hear them, and that they are valued. They're a valued part of our institution. So in addition to that, we did have other goals, which was to educate the faculty, staff, and students about Afro-Latino history and culture, and also to engage our students in digital research, right? Researching through the computer system, because most research nowadays is really, you started off with the computer and it's a skill. It's not just something you're going to pick up easily. And then the other skill that we wanted to emphasize was, of course, remixing of media. We wanted them to create something new, a new product, by mixing images and audio and text and maps. I guess those are images. So anyway, to create new products, that is something that we have heard from employers that they consider a 21st century skill, right? To be able to be familiar with these types of technologies. And let me see. ArcGIS actually has several types of products. So the one we used is actually called ArcGIS Story Maps. And we use it because it's an interactive teaching strategy, so it is very interactive. You can put all these media into one platform, and then it's easy to edit, and if you have a lot of students, you can put them into groups. Interactive teaching strategies foster engagement, collaboration, and critical thinking, and we hope a love of learning. I've also found that for students who don't like to write, writing in the story maps became something that was much easier for them to do. I don't know if it's because it's online or if because they could add all these other things to it. Okay, so far we have, we attended, of course, all of the meetings we had with CCDI, which were great, but especially a meeting with the reference librarians from the Library of Congress, Danny Thurber and Joseph Torres Gonzalez. They were really extremely helpful for us. We were having problems with the keywords for the Library of Congress, and so they helped us out with figuring out where to look and how to look for the material. We also, during all spring, the students in our classes were engaged in creating story maps. We took different tactics, right? So professors could decide what they wanted to do. Some of them created individual story maps, others were in groups, and others where the professor created the story map and they did videos, narration within the story map. We had a successful showcase of what we had on April 30th. It was a bunch of the faculty, and also we had some staff members come and students, about 30 people in all. And what was interesting is that many of the students that came had participated in their class in the story maps. So they were very interested in seeing what it would look like, what the finished product, or at least halfway finished product would look like. So we were very happy with that. And then of course also Ms. Jennifer Fuentes, who is the online learning librarian at UHD, spoke about sourcing the Library of Congress and hopefully inspiring some faculty to work with us in the fall. So we're done with spring, but we still have the fall to go. And now I am going to pass the podium to Jennifer Fuentes. Thank you.
Thank you, Raquel. So for our project, we had our showcase that we featured at the end of May. And after the showcase, I was able to speak with many of the faculty and staff members who attended, and they were very inspired by the stories that they heard and saw in these story maps. The investigations that went into Central and South America, African enslaved peoples and the ports of entry, as well as the different traditional roots of Afro-Latino cultural customs within Central and South America, including Santeria, an Afro-Cuban religion that was based on the Yoruba beliefs of West Africa. The stories of key public figures were also present, including the Puerto Rican scholar, activist, and author Miriam Jimenez Ramon, and Afro-Latino groups such as the Garifuna. They all helped illustrate the presence and the need for Afro-Latino representation within our local communities as well as nationally. By sowing the seeds of curiosity and inquiry, these story maps have already resulted in those outside of the immediate project being impacted to engage in Afro-Latino history and culture. It has been a great start to our project, and the next phase is just beginning. Our initiatives to translate these stories into English and Spanish to allow them to be in a bilingual environment and to collect more stories in the fall term are setting the stage for wider collection development and distribution of these stories. The pivotal work of translation has also led to further understandings and to the thoughtful consideration of language choice in differing cultural contexts. This project has not gone without its challenges, though. Some of the challenges that we faced, including all of our grant team being new to the Esri ArcGIS system, we were unsure as to whether or not it would be a system that would be easy for our students and faculty to use. And luckily, through the grant, we were able to get training from Esri to help guide our creators in developing dynamic story maps to tell the stories that they wanted to tell from the research that they had gathered. They were able to use the technical skills that they developed and incorporate many different types of multimedia. One of the next challenges that we faced was the unfamiliarity of faculty and students with the Library of Congress resources and locating them within the loc.gov system. This challenge provided me as a librarian with the chance to teach our faculty and students about the Library of Congress subject headings, the amazing research guides, and different searching techniques that they could use. This included the use of emerging technologies such as ChatGPT to ethically assist in keyword development and scope analysis. The search for materials also brought up the questions of historical research considerations, such as the analysis of different narratives and translation concepts. Although our students were able to find some resources from the Library of Congress digital collections, others struggled with many topics, some of which included Afro-Dominican drumming styles such as ceremonial and religious salvas and palo music, and the previously mentioned Santeria. Luckily, with the guidance and support of the Library of Congress librarians through the Ask a Librarian feature on the LOC website, subject librarians were very helpful in guiding our researchers to other external sources that they could use. Even with the challenges faced by our grant team and the grant participants, the knowledge and skills gained through this process are paramount not only for this project, but to the future research endeavors amongst our faculty and students. As one of our faculty participants, Dr. Jimenez Pabon, put it, these materials not only improved our research, but also emphasized the Library of Congress's importance as a central point for the comprehensive investigations into Afro-Latino history and other topics we will research in the future at UHD. The current and future impacts of this project would not have been possible without the support and guidance of the CCDI team, the Library of Congress librarians and staff, and the support of the CCDI Advisory Board and the Mellon Foundation. We thank you for this opportunity to empower others to find the voices of the past and present and help tell their stories. Thank you.
Can you all hear me? Oh, is it? Thank you. Okay, yeah. Awesome. Another round of applause for our wonderful higher education awardees. Your enthusiasm and dedication to your work really shined through, and I really enjoyed your presentation, so thank you for that. Before we get started, I have a few questions, but I want to check in to see if we have any questions from our audiences, either in person or virtual. Oh, great. We have one question.
Hi, I don't know if you can see me. Thank you so much for your presentations. I think that this question is for Angelo State University, but it's really for any one of you who are working with K-12 students or educators. I was wondering if you could say more about that part of your project and how you are approaching engagement with the library's primary sources in that context. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think I can begin by answering. We intend to hold a K-12 workshop, and we're going to have a series of faculty who are going to explain, like I'm going to focus on, kind of Texas resources. We have another person who's going to do kind of earlier American resources. We have another person who has more of a global perspective. We're also really lucky to have someone from the education department that has a background in special education, so we're going to be able to have some differentiation in those lessons, and that'll be great because these resources are really for everyone. They're not just something you would use in an advanced placement class. Any student should be able to tell their own story. So our workshop really is trying to bring people together, K-12 educators, and show them the Library of Congress resources, show them the resources from the West Texas collection, and really understand how the story of West Texas is really the story of America. And our theme is all history is local, and I think we really want to give teachers the means to teach their own story to the region. I don't know if you want to continue, Dr. Madler?
Maybe just a couple quick anecdotes to add to that. A big part of what our K-12 teachers need to do is meet their standards and be very mindful of their curriculum. So we'll structure the workshop in such a way that helps them to see primary source materials in light of their objectives and standards that they need to meet within the classroom.
I think this one works too. Great. Fantastic. Are there any virtual questions coming in? Okay, so I have a few prepared for us, and it's actually along the same vein as the question that Eileen just asked, which is, during your presentations, I noticed that each of you had a common project outcome, which is the development of resources that can be used by educators and students in the classroom. Could each of you share why it was important to include this as a goal, or how including those resources for educators enriches your projects?
Sure. I think that follows up on what we've talked about, helping student and teachers learn how the region reflects the nation as a whole. West Texas is an understudied region. There's very little historical data, especially about our area in particular, and we want to help people realize the region's importance and the importance of their own story. And I think one of the things I've seen through doing the research is how what was going on in San Angelo, Texas, for example, in terms of people getting involved politically, it's the same thing that happened in San Antonio, San Francisco, New York. And I think there's a lot of parallels, and I think that's really going to be helpful for people to really see, how their own story is part of our history.
I think this award being part of higher education, we are a museum at a university, and so I think education is part of our mission as the museum at a university. And so providing resources and collections and
to our students is really important, and creating that community for students to feel comfortable coming to us or seeing themselves in the collections, connecting to the Indigenous artist curators that we have brought in, and expanding their networks that way as well. So it's more than just pedagogy, it's also creating that community.
Maybe I'd just add on too, because I think we were really intentional around when we said that we were going to do educational programming. We wanted to make sure that it was what the guest curators wanted to do, that we weren't just saying they were going to do a workshop or they were going to build a teacher manual. And then what that ended up happening was they were focused on community. That community building was really important. And so then the programs really evolved around that, and then we kind of see how it blossomed into a larger space to where now even the community that they connected with on the first trip are part of the community with our grand opening, which then creates ownership and more sustainable relationships for the museum and also the project as a whole.
Yeah, I think for us, one of the most important things was to have content that was actually accurate and that was not prejudiced or racist towards Afro-Latinos in general, right? And there is a gap in our textbooks, unfortunately. The textbook I'm using for one of my literature classes has one page on the African diaspora. There's nothing about the enslavement of African people in the Americas, which clearly happened. And so those are the things that we're looking at. And also textbooks on the cultural side that were published maybe in the 1980s or the 70s, which are still being published and republished, and are just terrible. I mean, there's just no way that we could use that material in our classes, we felt. So it's hugely important for us then to create this content with the new material that we have, that we know, and things that have been discovered over the years. Otherwise, it's not that you couldn't teach it, but it would make it much more difficult to teach.
Thank you for your responses. So I have another question for the group. And what has the experience of reusing the library's collections been like? Are there specific experiences that maybe stand out as particularly rewarding or challenging?
Well, I'm a fan of history and digging into the archives, so just understanding the breadth and depth that's out there has been quite fun, and a big part of our project is to create those connections in our own local archives and the stories of people around West Texas, and we're finding a lot of connections to the materials that are out there in the Library of Congress archives. So that was one of our main goals, and it's come to fruition, so that's been fun.
Yeah, I think it's great to really have the digital availability. I remember researching in the main reading room as a very broke graduate student, and there was one day when I was like, do I copy this or do I have lunch? So, I think having these digital resources really opens it up, not only, in terms of economically, but it also gives people, someone in a small town in West Texas with 1,000 people can really see that their own experience can be, really signified by what happens in the Library of Congress resources. So I think that's been a great connection that we've seen, and I think it's been really rewarding.
I'm going to be really honest, it's hard. And I think from when we sat together in March with the other Native artist community members, my friends, colleagues, we looked at a variety of images, and they had even looked, I had talked to them prior to, and they tried to look at them at home, but as we heard earlier, it's painful. Edward Curtis he was a colonizer, like the ways in which he uplift white supremacy. And so, in the way he's famous, like we'll go and you can go to Louisville, which I know I didn't say that right, please forgive me. And you can go into a restaurant and you'll see people's ancestors plastered on the wall because they're public access, right? And so many of the folks, Deborah, Melina, Yadika, many of them decided to not look at them at home. And then we ended up asking if they wanted to look, and we wanted to kind of see if there were some community members or images that they were interested in looking at or taking inspiration from for the project. And some of them said no and looked at other things. And when we did look at pieces in our learning studio, I think we made it through 5, and it was a collective decision to not, because even within that first 5, ceremony pictures were pulled up. And we were like, none of us should see these, even though one of them was from a community from Jemez Pueblo. That's really hard. It is hard emotionally and physically. It's hard to hold space and be in community. But I also think there was some joy that came out of it because we were there together and we talked about it. And then, being the Native folks that we are, we of course started to laugh and make fun of it, right? And so there was like spaces of humor and laughter, which I know is a space of processing the pain, but also created a larger conversation around what is it in a Native laugh? Like, how is it, like, what does it mean for them to define us? And how are we defining us in this space now? And what does that look like for this project? And so we talked quite a bit about even just that Native laugh that we started hearing in the archives of traditional music and what that means for being recorded and who defines what is of value versus what we define of value. So I think even just, the easiest answer I would say is it's hard. But we continue to push through it and talk about it. And then I think this exhibit is a testament of like standing in solidarity with each other and uplifting each other.
I think for some of the work that we've done thus far, one of the most rewarding things has been to have participants go into the archives and as they're digging in, really ask good questions and have that inquiry process and really think about the things that they were finding and the historical context that they were put in from, the racist views or from the different stories that they were hearing from different locations. And I think that was one of the most rewarding things, was to see their minds start to open up to different perspectives and different ideas. And that's not something I think they would have gotten was it not for the Library of Congress collection and the views that they were able to see in there.
I just wanted to add quickly that it's just an incredible treasure to be able to go on to the digital collection and look at all these things and all the information that is there. Our university is not the flagship university, so for us to do research, we have to do it through the computer. That's where we start. That's also a skill I think that as faculty we use all the time, and I think our students need to learn. I started out doing research with the card catalogs, right? That was at the tail end of the card catalog use, and then it switched to computers, and now when I do research, I start with the computer. So I love libraries. I love physical libraries, and being here is just such a thrill. But that is too limiting nowadays, right? Most things are online, and you start your research there, and if you have to go to the physical library, then you go. So I think it's a tremendous program that you have, and a gift to all of us.
Thank you all for your trust and your honesty and your responses. That was wonderful. Thank you. I now have some awardee-specific questions that we can move into. And the first one is for Angelo State University. So we talked a little bit about your project deliverables. We talked about how across the board everyone is developing projects or products for students and educators. But for yours specifically, it included working with a large team of students and faculty to develop the content for this project. You could have easily farmed out that process to a third party, but instead you chose to work with your communities. Could you share a little bit about the value that perspective adds to your projects?
The value of having the
students.
Mm-hmm. Well, a big part of what we do is educate, and we wanted them to have that firsthand experience in primary source research, and really wanted them to be a part of the project. And as a Hispanic serving institution, we wanted to bring voice to their stories too. And in fact, one of our students is able to highlight a story of his grandfather in the next article that is being written. So we really wanted to make sure that the student voices were heard and that faculty were involved, so that hopefully, we can continue the project into the future. So I firmly believe that if you do something for me without me, then it's against me. So I like to bring as many people to the table as we can up front and to be part of that process.
Yep, and I think it's been great to see the development of the students. You know, when a student comes in and works on an article, they've figured out these are, you know, the key court cases to look at. So you've seen that they've themselves are making the kinds of connections. Like sometimes I'll suggest something and they'll be like, oh, I already found that case, which is always rewarding that they're being able to find in the Library of Congress resources, you know, the things that are really important and relevant to them. And I think bringing in a student perspective is really helpful because we have some students who, you know, grew up in Texas and may be very familiar with Texas culture, but we have international students as well on our team. So we have people who come with a really wide variety of stories, and I think that's been beneficial in the project, just seeing the way, you know, students, faculty, and staff all bring, you know, different voices to the process.
Fantastic. Our next question is for IU. You're working with 3 artists that have geographic, cultural, and creative connections to the collections at IU, but also the Library of Congress. And could you share a little bit more about how you formed these partnerships with them?
So I think the first step we wanted to make sure, like when we, 'cause I knew them from working in the field, to just be really honest, but from the work that I've done in museums, also throughout Indian country and within just various communities. But as a museum, they had not connected with IU before. They didn't know us, didn't trust us, rightfully so, right? Thinking about all of that. And so we really wanted to make sure that we were stepping forward with an intentional practice to make sure that we set our commitment right away. And then if that commitment was not a commitment they wanted to engage in, we also asked them how they wanted to change that commitment because we wanted to work with them. And so we created a letter, a very long letter, which asked the librarian, who was like, maybe we should edit. I'm like, I don't think so. But it was very much outlining the grant, outlining the timeline, also what the project goals are, and what our commitment as a museum and as people who are working to work with them, how we were as a space that our job is to uplift and to step back and to do what they want. And we would make sure we would try and fight however we need to make sure that we need to happen, then it needs to happen. And that's our job, is to make it happen. And so we said it better in that letter. And then we asked them, is this what they would like to do? And here's some of the deliverables we want you to achieve. And this is what we're going to pay you, because we want to pay you, which is really important, that there's higher budget line items to pay you for your time and your supplies, that money isn't just all mixed up together. Your time is also just as valuable as the supplies that we're going to be giving you. And then we asked, what do you want us to change? Because we want to partner with you. And do you like this plan? And they said yes. And so then we also met with them when we first found about it and then reviewed all of this. Did things change? How do you want us to change the partnership? So it's consistently checking in, because we know consent can change at any point in time, and also projects and people's responsibilities and where you sit in terms of like the impacts of coloniality and society change. So we wanted to make sure that we were holding space for that. And it's even, I think, the same way we're still building those relationships and pieces of trust. Trust is earned. And I don't know if we really earned, even though I've known them for a while, who's to say that as an IU representative, I've earned their trust? And I think, Kelsey, maybe you, because I think there's an example where you're working with Deborah to build a script that could be just really wonderful to share.
Yeah, so Deborah, in writing the exhibit script, did not want to write her own script. She's a very busy person, and so I wanted to work with her on doing that, and so we collaborated over Zoom. I am a new mother. I have an infant. She is a very busy person as well. We could record this session, our conversation, and talk. I could then process it and write out a draft and send it back to her for her edits and suggestions. And it's been a really nice collaboration that way. We're still very early in the process. We just have the first draft sent, so there's still more work to be done. But like Brandy said, checking in has been really important, and reviewing what we promised, reviewing where we're at and where we're going. So checking in has been really important.
Thank you for that. And we are very close to time, but I did want to squeeze in this last question for UHG. And could you just share with us, you shared a little bit about how ArcGIS, you had to learn how to use it to create your story maps. Could you quickly share why a story map in that vehicle was best for your project?
It was because it becomes a seamless thing and it looks extremely professional. It's very easy to use. You drop in the images and you write the text. and you can actually type it in Spanish as well. So that's a big help. So it was all those things combined.
I think another reason that we chose it was because it added a visual element to a text-based narrative that is often shown. So being able to take a map and really show where these people are, where these groups are living, how they're moving from place to place, has really helped.
They're interactive maps.
Yes.
Interactive maps on it, so they're not static.
Yeah. So you can just click on one spot and that will bring up more information or more images of those locations or peoples or customs. So that was something that we really wanted to develop within these maps so that it is visual, it's more impactful and meaningful, and they're more likely to remember a lot of the information that they find there.
Thank you for such a succinct but wonderful answer. That is all the time we have for questions. So once again, a big round of applause for our higher education awardees.
My name is Kimber Thomas, and I'm a Senior Innovation Specialist on the CCDI team. As you can see from our earlier presentations, our awardees are continually exploring how emerging technologies can be used to highlight and preserve community stories. By leveraging different digital tools, technologies, and methods, our awardees bring new perspectives to the digital collections, ensuring that the experiences and histories of communities of color are not only documented and preserved, but also celebrated in innovative ways. Today, we are also excited to discuss a new technology that's on everybody's mind, artificial intelligence, especially the intersection of artificial intelligence and community engagement. We want to explore how AI can be used to reflect and amplify the experiences and histories of communities of color. The title Community Engaged AI refers to the development and application of artificial intelligence technologies that prioritize and incorporate the voices, needs, and cultural context of communities of color. We are joined today by two incredible artists and creative technologists, Curry Hackett and Tahir Hemphill, who are doing fascinating work around AI, community engagement, and storytelling. We asked Curry and Tahir to join us to discuss the possible transformative potential of AI when harnessed with a community-centered approach. In discussing this potential, they will also address the politics of misappropriation, displacement, and labor embedded in the development and usage of different AI tools and technologies. Curry's work, which spans across various mediums and methodologies, deeply examines and legitimizes Black cultural production and its interplay between individual and collective expressions. From his innovative projects like For With and individual practice towards collective expression, to his explorations of the Black landscape through diasporic performance methods, Curry consistently highlights the importance of centering Black voices and stories in all forms of creative and intellectual work. Also joining us is Tahir Hemphill, whose groundbreaking work at the intersection of hip-hop culture and technology profoundly impacts how we think about cultural data and its representation. Tahir's project, The Hip Hop Word Count, uses data mining to analyze the language of hip-hop music, providing insights into the cultural and social context of this genre. His work, including the innovative project Actual Fact, challenges us to consider who owns cultural data and how AI can either facilitate or hinder cultural ownership. By visualizing and mapping the semantics of hip-hop, Tahir creates tools that engage communities in new ways, making cultural research both accessible and meaningful. The work of Tahir and Curry converges in their shared commitment to using technology to honor and elevate the histories and contributions of communities of color. Their projects invite us to think more deeply about how AI can be community engaged, ensuring that technological advancements serve to empower rather than to marginalize. By fostering a dialogue between their respective fields, we can explore innovative methods to document, interpret, and celebrate different cultural narratives through AI. Today's discussion will delve into how AI can further these efforts by creating digital experiences that are not only technologically advanced, but also deeply rooted in the cultural and historical context of our communities. And before we get into our discussion, I just want to acknowledge our wonderful intern, Janaya Peters, who helped us shape some of the questions for Curry and Tahir. And please join me in welcoming Curry into here. They'll come up and talk a little bit about their work before we get into this discussion. So welcome Curry to here.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much, Kimber, for that gracious introduction. Looking forward to chatting with you all for the next hour or so, couple hours. I'm super excited to be here today and share a bit of how I think my work is engaging in disciplines of, I'd say, Black studies, Southern studies, landscape architecture, maybe even religious studies, ethnobotany, food, all these things I feel like are floating around in my mind. A lot of that to me has to do with memory, basically, and how memory is shared, how stories and knowledge are shared and maintained. A lot of that I think is bound up in what we call archival practice. I think some of you all know about that a little bit. But also like how culture is produced sort of on the everyday, the kind of quotidian means that Black folks, at least in my case, produce culture and knowledge. I sort of titled this talk so that you all won't forget, which is a quote that stems from a conversation with my mom, and when she talks about like what it means for food and her knowledge of plants and soil and arts, crafts, all of those things, why she shares those things with my sister and I whenever we go home to rural Virginia, as I'll talk about. She's always saying like, this road along this landscape is named after so-and-so in your family, et cetera. So in a way, she is sort of maintaining my understanding of my family's archive. And so at the end of this, our conversation, she's always saying like, I'd like to share these things with you all so that you all don't forget. And I think technology and AI, I think, can have a really interesting and kind of critical role in what that means for us. So, I grew up in this small town in Southern Virginia called Farmville. That's the actual name of the town. It's about 20,000 people in the county, about 8,000 folks in the town, I believe. And just outside of Farmville is sort of a small farming village called Prospect. And in Prospect, my mom's side of the family has been fortunate enough to have owned about 120 acres of land that we've owned since the 19th century, at least by my count. I still have no idea how we got that land, certainly not how we got this much land. But I think what's important is that this landscape is not just sort of like a hilly, open sort of pasture. It's not just a landscape of plants, right, and agriculture, and certainly is not one certainly not one of like extraction and forced labor that we tend to think about when we talk about Black relationships with land. In fact, it's more so where I think I sort of fostered a relationship with soil, with plants. The soil is actually this red when you're in the South, of course. Ingenuity, invention, I think maybe offering some really interesting correctives to how we talk about labor. And so, I think a lot about this place, and it structures a lot about how I think about what it means to be an architect by trade, or to teach architecture, which is what I'm currently doing, and what it means to engage in these other disciplines, or even to reach outside of the discipline of architecture as a means of informing how and what we build. And so, I think the sort of the land on which these cultures sort of occur, as well as the cultures themselves, comprise what I would consider a Black landscape. And so, this is ultimately like what I kind of come back to during my teaching and throughout my practice. And I'm always thinking. More recently, I've been thinking about this Octavia Butler quote, which is this idea of writing yourself into a narrative. That she says, you got to make your own worlds. You got to write yourself in. Whether you're part of the greater society or not, you got to write yourself in. And I think this is something that I think seems really relevant for the current moment as we're talking about AI's role in maybe creating memories or maintaining archives or inventing new archival practices and the like. I'll just start with a bit of context and just walk through a bit of some of the projects that I was engaged with before I got into sort of these explorations with AI tools. These are some images from a studio that I co-taught at Carleton University in Ottawa. It was an architecture studio, in which we were looking at Black relationships with Black performance methods. Again, these sort of everyday, not necessarily the occasional, but more so like looking at the everyday Black cultural practices, and then inviting students to invent ways of drawing these different practices. So in this case, Lorraine was creating her own notational system to better understand, I'd say, the sociospatial characteristics of Double Dutch. And in this case, Alia was looking at beating your feet, which I'm sure you all know about, and created a notational system to try to understand that practice better. And so this is, I think, I think what we mean about literally in this case, and not necessarily writing yourself in, like as Octavia Butler says, but maybe sort of drawing yourself in, right? So like finding ways of imaging and surfacing narratives that are maybe understood, or I'm sorry, undertold or understood. And then this is a project that I worked on in grad school, I guess, last year. So yeah, just a few months before I started playing sort of critically with tools like Midjourney. And this is a course that it was at Harvard in the graduate design school, and the course required us to enter one of the 10,000 archival collections on campus. And I ended up stumbling on this collection of letters by the Carter family, which was an enslaved family in Gloucester, Virginia, near the mouth of the York River. And so these letters were mostly from an enslaved mother, Polly Carter, and her one of her sons, to her freed son in Richmond, Hilton Carter. And so using tools like GIS, I ended up sort of spatializing this collection. So like trying to invent ways of indexing this collection that go beyond just your simple finding aid. And as you can see here, most of the activity is between Gloucester County and Richmond there, with a few outliers. Also like created a sociogram to try to understand who's writing to whom. So as you can see, a lot of people here are writing to Hamilton, but he's sort of leaving a lot of folks on red, so to speak. Not as many people. He's not writing out as many people, but also the sociogram is also roughly sort of laid out geographically as well. So H.M. Booth, Louisa Johnson, they were actually writing from New York State. Some of these others were writing elsewhere in Virginia. But this whole collection generally centers around Central Virginia. And as I'm like looking through this collection, I'm just really fascinated, and I'm handling the material with my bare hands, right? Just really fascinated by, I think, the everyday, topics that are discussed. At one point, Polly mentions her master by name. In another letter, asks her son to bring his father a bit of tobacco. So it was almost like reading like text messages or emails or something from 200 years ago. And as I started thinking about the time that these letters were written, it occurred to me that these letters would have been illegal to read and write and to transmit because it was illegal for slaves to read and write at that time. And so that meant the act of writing and the paper itself was actually not this neutral material, but actually the act of writing and reading them was sort of, came at some risk. And so the final, this is just me creating a bunch of graphics and indexes to understand the collection. And the final project of this course, we had to create a forgery of something that could have been in the collection that wasn't. And I ended up circling around this question of like, where were Black folks getting paper from? Like, is there a story or history of Black folks making their own paper? And if so, what would that look like? And so I ended up basically settling on this idea, this kind of speculative idea of Black folks making paper out of things that they would have had readily available. And so I made paper for the class using okra, mugwort, and collard greens. So this is the final result here. And so, like, again, not entirely concerned here with the historical record in terms of this being like a real thing, but I just mostly like highlight this project because I started with this sort of almost prosaic collection and a frankly inaccessible archival space. And then like there's this arc through the course of the semester where we end up into a project that is essentially like purely speculative, but rooted in sort of a real history, a real truth. And I think that's how I've been encountering my work with AI over the last year. Those are the kinds of questions that I've been asking AI tools, namely Midjourney. This was an image you might have recognized from the beginning, where if you're in the rural South, this is a pretty customary scene where you'll have, if it can hold water and it can hold soil, I would say it's pretty fair game to be repurposed as a planter, in this case, prickly pear in a bathtub. There's a toilet around the corner outside of this frame too. Using Midjourney, I'm able to ask questions like, what if these weren't like just sort of customary things that are in these small towns, these small sort of obscure settings in the rural South, but actually, if they were actually sort of hyper visible and, in this case, I think I had it rooted in a city block in Harlem, right? So this thing that is like customary to me that you kind of have to be in the rural South to see, but what if it was actually this hyper visible, hyper valuable thing? And then similarly, I've always wondered why the red clay soil in the South hasn't been used more imaginatively in architecture settings beyond just bricks. And so, I was able to use Midjourney to imagine what that can look like. So these are just kind of, I've considered these almost like sketches or just sort of scenes that highlight, a world that is plausible, right? So it's kind of like Afrofuturism, but I think locating Black liberation closer to something that looks like the present, not so much the distant future. And then, I think it's really just kind of celebrating a world in which Black ingenuity is sort of undergirding everyday life. And then more recently, I think I've been thinking like, well, how do I use AI, in this case, again, Midjourney, to continue to invent sort of cultural use cases for these tools? For another course, I ended up overlaying a diagram of the so-called the Tuskegee machine, which is Booker T. Washington's funding model in which he had the students harvesting clay to make the bricks on campus. And then using AI to envision what that scene might have looked like and kind of collage them together. So this is not one image, but this is like a bunch of like maybe 8 or 9 images together, kind of collaged manually. None of these photos exist. And that thought process sort of lands in a more recent project that I just closed just a couple months ago. Downtown Brooklyn, this was called Ugly Beauties, in which I used about like 8 images, about actually 15 images, and collaged a 110-foot long tapestry that was printed on construction mesh and suspended from scaffolding in a plaza in Brooklyn, which was sort of making comments on like the certain aesthetics that we tend to attribute to plants, in this case, namely weeds. And so it was trying to make a connection between the societal attitude towards weeds and the societal attitude towards Black folks, and kind of collapsing both of those narratives directly onto each other to create this sort of scene. So that's what you see here. It was about 8 feet tall, 9 feet tall by 110 feet all the way around. This is, I think, kind of what I mean by like drawing yourself in, like just kind of creating opportunities for things like this to occur. Yeah. I just love this photo because it's kind of mapping an artificial existence on top of a real one, which I think is kind of what my practice has been trafficking in. So yeah, I think that was it. We can skip that one. But I think I'm really fascinated by the kinds of questions that AI tools can allow us to ask, and I'm curious about the kinds of emergent workflows that we can kind of look at in terms of image making, archival practice, storytelling. These are all the kinds of things that are sort of running through my mind at the moment. So thank you all for letting me share those.
Hi. My name is Tahir Hemphill. The last time I was in this room, you'll see on a slide in this presentation, I was the 4th education chair at the Kluge Center here at Library of Congress, and part of my time here, I gathered together digital artists that worked with digital humanities and paired them with domain experts at this library. I told them, if you could have access to any object, because the library has how many millions of objects? it's the biggest library. This is the biggest library in the world. So I asked the, I'm totally off script. I asked the artists if they could have access to any object in the library's collection, what would it be? And I'll try to pair you with the librarian, the domain expert that has the knowledge of that object. And I brought them together here to explore and share and playtest. The event was called Playtest. So it's happy to be, I'm happy to be back. I'm going to run through these 9 slides really quickly. I made an assumption that you might already have a background of who I am, but for those that don't, there's some bookmarks in here. Yeah, so my practice, I'm interested in how systems can be used to generate form. As an artist, you know, it took too long to draw. I could draw pretty well, but it just took too long, and I was like, this doesn't make sense to me. So I picked up cameras, I picked up design, I picked up a T-square. I was trained at a young age to be an engineer, and took that training to the arts. I'm also interested in how collaborative knowledge production can help with the resilience of communities, how, you know, a lot of the projects that we do at the Rap Research Lab, when we prototype, we keep a close eye on what we're doing, and we turn that process into teaching curriculum and lesson plans, and we teach students to do the same thing. And I guess the third column is, you know, hip hop as a framework. So I was brought up, I came of age in New York City in the 80s. And my two main influences were rap music and hip hop culture, and hacking, and like hacking on my Commodore 128 computer, right? I waited, you know, for the upgrade from 64 to 128. Yeah, and you'll see, you know, and the projects that I work on, the projects that I work on are a culmination of all of those things. So one of the things that I created that informs all of this work is a system that analyzes language. And right now we have it analyzing the text of all of hip hop, basically. So there's lyrics from 1 million songs analyzed. There's about 25,000 or 30,000 artists, and really about 40,000 albums. And all of so we have a semantic analysis. We use some natural language programming, natural language processing tools to do a semantic analysis. So basically for every utterance in hip hop, there's a time and a place on earth for it. So you can find out who's rapping about coffee, where in the world, the context, whether or not the song was joyful or sad. And you can download those data and bring it into your own research projects. You can map with it. You can make data visualizations, which is something that I've been doing over the past 10 years. And that's cool. It's like we have like a database, we have spreadsheets, but we know that data also need memory. So you could have data, you could have cultural data, you could have a really good programmer and make really beautiful data visualizations, but if the people working with the cultural data aren't from that culture or don't have a really deep understanding and knowledge of that culture, like problems happen. And we've seen a lot of those over the years, a lot of those problems. So, you know, once I made the system and I did a search, I forget what I typed in, maybe power or something, and I got this wall of text, you know, of all of these artists that use Black languages to talk about power in the context of power, whether or not it was power in romance or power in politics or power of their car. And I realized that I needed more people. So so I started a place for it, a rap research lab, where I invited other people that were rap enthusiasts and that were thinking about, culture and technology. And I invited them to come join me to start to parse some of this data and to make things from this data. So the Rap Research Lab, we're a creative technology studio. We use a hip hop framework to develop new ways for people to engage with data and culture. And again, the hip hop framework is, in the beginning, there were no hip hop records, right? There were funk records, jazz records, rock records. And the people that played these records to make hip hop used the hip hop framework. The same way the hip hop framework applied to dance is b-boying and b-girling. The same way the hip hop framework applied to painting is graffiti. The same way, And so we're applying the same framework, I like to think, to data and technology. And some of the things we make, so now, the Rap Research Lab, we have a learning platform that sits on top of these data, and it runs these data through an AR experience, and we're teaching middle school students across the nation math, STEM, but specifically math, geography, and critical thinking analysis. Another one of our projects is we use all of these data to train a neural net, to train the AI how to rap. I don't know if you can see the lyrics that it produces. We did this in I think 2017, and we're just getting back around to updating it. But in terms of content, it's definitely good. But when you do a close reading, you're kind of confused. Like maybe you're not. Like for me, I'm like maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe this poem is like too deep, too dense. Like I can hang for the first few lines, but then it kind of falls apart, which is also similar to ChatGPT. Like the first few responses are good, and then it just like falls apart. And we also, Rap Research Lab, we also make exhibitions. So we create sites and spaces for people to come together and experience these things that we make. So this was an exhibition at UMBC a couple of years ago. And on the right, you'll see the final form of the Rap Bot, which was a console, and you would send a text message to it, and that would be like the starter text, and then it would respond to your text and display the lyrics on the screen, and then print out the lyrics with printer paper, so you would get a receipt. And on the surface, there's humor there. But also if you consider all of the rappers that are on trial right now for their lyrics and who is allowed to be artistic with their music and who isn't, you can get into further conversations. And also, like, when one person's art form turns into another person's crime, we have a whole project proposal that digs deeper into this work. And these are the images from this room. So also another way to bring people together is, like bringing people to, like, identifying folks in our community and platforming them also. So we were in this room in 2018, and we had a play test where creative technologists, brought their work and engaged with librarians and the public. And the next play test, I'm promoting. The next play test is at the Kennedy Center on August 1st. And we're going to do a prompt battle, AI prompt battle. So we've identified a handful of prompt engineers, and we're also opening up to the general public for people that that have the same skills, and we're going to put them head to head, and we're going to have judges, and we're going to ask the judges provocative questions, to create an environment, a fun environment to kind of close this gap of knowledge with these technologies and artificial intelligence and the implications that they have on our lives, so that at least for those that don't know, give them some sort of language to be able to talk about it with other people, to be able to understand how their lives are being impacted in a fun way. Thank you.
Thank you, Curry and Tahir. So I have a few questions before we open it up to our audience. So community engagement is crucial in the development of AI projects that serve diverse populations. What strategies do you employ to ensure that the voices and needs of Black, Indigenous, Hispanic or Latino, Asian American and Pacific Islander and other communities of color are authentically represented and integrated into your AI-driven initiatives?
Okay, great. It's a thick question. I've been thinking a lot about thickness and thick descriptions, like the social sciences term. And I think that's kind of what we have to do. I think we kind of have to think through like what are the forms of media, what are the ways of sharing knowledge. I think really kind of understanding those methods in the ways that are culturally specific feels like, I don't know, it sounds abstract, but I actually feel like that's like, I think actually training the machine to at least be knowledgeable of the various ways that language shows up when like say a song is transferred from mother to child, or what it means for a choir to be singing. I think those, like how language actually gets transmitted from one subject or one group to another, those are things that I feel like can kind of shape, I guess, some idea of like an internal model of how a kind of social group performs, and maybe even how it performs and generates knowledge. I think maybe more on the ground or kind of like more materially is just like making sure that the folks that are building these large models are being like radically and fearlessly inclusive in terms of who's on their staffs. I think that's the only way that you're going to get at kind of start to fill those gaps and really see where there's vulnerabilities. And also opportunities for growth and innovation, because otherwise I think you're just like you were saying during your talk, where if you're not from a certain cultural group, you don't know what you don't know, in terms of like again like linguistic structures or certain cultural tropes that could be incorporated into a given model. So I think a lot of it is making sure that the people are in the room that are informing certain decisions, and then also like really thinking critically about the logics that undergird these systems in the first place. I think a lot of times we tend to think of math and these things are settled and intractable, but even the basic maths and logics that undergird the code, for instance, or the coding languages, all of that is also politicized. So I think thinking critically down to that level, I think is something that we have to kind of, that's what I mean when I say it's a very thick problem.
Yeah, one of the ways we do it is where I am and the people that are down with us, we're critical makers. So we make things not just for the end result to put them in, a white box space on the wall. Every part of that process is also important. And I've found that every part of that process can be turned into, it's an algorithm, and it could be turned into a lesson to open it up for other people to learn how to do the thing, which is sort of not really how, you know, most of the time when art is made, you know, there's like a mystery behind it, and it has to be unique, and no one else can do this thing. But we're kind of opening up, like, yeah, you can't do the exact same thing, but you could do something similar. So I think people have called that radical, but it's how I think when I make, and it's how I think about sharing the process of what I do when I'm making a thing. Also, I mean, we're using hip hop lyrics, right? So not only is it a database of Black languages, but it's fun content. And to add all the data and add all the technology and the analysis to that content allows us to, you know, attract, you know, I mean, the kids love it, but it also allows us to attract more people. They might initially come to it, you know, with giggles, but they'll eventually leave with a really profound understanding of these systems, these processes, and the implications of these technologies on our lives.
I just wanted to add a quick thing, but you got me thinking about questions of access. And I think as these models or our usage of these models gets more personal, obviously like Apple just talked about how it's gonna basically structure their whole new iOS system. So, you know, I think as they get more personal, I have been thinking more recently, like, what does it mean for a community to, you know, have their own archive or their own model? I think it'll be interesting to see how these models get socialized in that way, and who has access to those different, in the same way that we kind of gatekeep within certain communities. I think that'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
And both of your works emphasize the intersection of culture and technology. To hear with your Hip Hop Word Count project, and then Curry with your community-focused design initiatives, how do you see AI transforming the way we document and interpret cultural histories, especially for communities of color?
These questions. Boy. So these technologies are not going to go away. One. Two, we need to be included in. It's nice to be included in them. We need to be included in them. Two. Three. Being invisible to systems is also a form of protection. So whenever we're working, you know, it's like, I don't know if there's any Terminator fans in the building, but like, we're like, are we Miles Dyson, or like, are we the, you know, the scientist that's at the research lab that's just, you know, tinkering on this alien technology, but when he brings it back to life, that's gonna, you know, bring some, you know, some repercussions. But yeah, we had a partnership with, well, we were using some IBM AI, and we would find, because we have a close understanding of language and rap. So when IBM's Watson would analyze these lyrics, we'd be like, what? Like, that's not what that means. That's not a location. That's actually an object. And so we found these mistakes in the technologies, and then we started a partnership with them. But also, you know, in the back of my mind, I was like, do we need to show them everything? You know. But at the same time, if we're not counted, if you're not counted, you're not represented. I don't know. We're in a very interesting place right now.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I just finished a project here in DC. It's a permanent public art project in Kingman Park, and that was a project that did not use AI at all. That I think. No, we didn't. No, it was just all like seating, these kind of playful seating elements in a neighborhood park near 21st and D. And one of the, I think, more beautiful features of that project is that we literally just had conversations with some of the community members there and transcribed some of those conversations into these engraved, like, concrete planks that are situated in the ground throughout the park. And we also had we had a couple of workshops where we had the community go out and gather, like, textures, like they made rubbings of different textures from the surrounding neighborhood, and then we digitized those, and those became these sort of textured parts of these planks. And so I think, in a way, like, we already know how to have these, like, haptic, really interesting, really engaging strategies for sharing and preserving knowledge and memory and things like that. And I just wonder how AI basically builds on things that we're already doing. I don't know that we necessarily need to create something new all the time. In a way, it's a privilege to create something new. I think I wonder how, like, AI is really helping us to undergird and really be critical about existing archival practices. Like, I really enjoyed that project because in a way, it was so analog and it was so simple. And so, I'm wondering, like, what it means to, maybe the bigger problem that's right now is just demystifying the tools, right? Like, maybe that's the first step. And then I like what you're saying about the idea of who do we need to have everything? You know, what's Edward Glissant? He talks about the right to opacity. We don't have to. It's okay for us to kind of be our own black box and not have to have everything be super transparent. And I think that making sure that I guess referring to my previous comment, making sure that there's opportunities for communities to kind of steward their own models, their own technologies, their own knowledge. I think that has to be integral, I think, to any sort of community-oriented use case for AI.
Yeah, and I think the step before that is to understand what a model is, the importance of a model, understand that we're using models and how those models were trained, and the value of those models, so that if people do decide to create their own or, you know, include their own personal information, you know, they might have different demands, as opposed to just, you know, using what's available, or, you know, clicking the agreement without reading the agreement.
I'm also thinking about Mine Atairu's work, who's doing some really great work with AI, where she's using machine learning to, like, digitally repair, both in quotes, stolen artifacts from the African continent, namely the Benin bronzes. So I think that, you know, I think probably a really important note there as well is, like, maybe how do we start to think of these tools as maybe assisting in the project of repair and the project of kind of filling in holes in the historic record in ways that similar to the paper, or it's okay if those are maybe not entirely real, but, like, maybe I think it's really a matter of, like, what is the role of these tools socially, and what good can they do, assuming that we're framing good sort of on the terms of the in-group.
So I want to get real specific here. I want you to help us with our work at the Library of Congress. So what are some of the most promising AI technologies or methodologies that can be employed to make the vast digital collections of the Library of Congress more interactive and engaging for community-led and community-driven projects?
When I was here, LC Labs had a project that was it was open source, and it was asking citizens to record the marginalia of photographs and, like, of documents. And I always thought, I was like, man, that is such, I mean, God bless the people that actually, like, do that work. But, you know, AI can be helpful in doing that work. I still think the last eye should be a human eye. I mean, you know, if there's a mistake, the last eye will be a human eye, whether or not, you know, it'll be a human lawyer or a human judge or a human something. But work like that, I mean, To call it intelligence, say it again. Oh, to call it intelligence, I mean, is it intelligence or is it just like doing processes, lots of processes across a lot of documents really fast and giving back results? So if we apply it to things like that, I think it's super helpful.
That in that course that I described, that was the most time that I had spent in an archival space for any given project, any given use. And I learned so much about like finding aids and like our sort of all these, how many steps are involved between just taking off your jacket or your getting a pencil and getting into the space and sitting down and calling for a given collection or an asset. I couldn't help but feel, I mean, I understood that was all in service of protecting the sort of sanctity of the collection, but I also couldn't help but feel like every step that I had to go through to get to the thing was a barrier. And so I wonder how these tools, whether the output is text or image or something else, I wonder how those tools can be used to create more accessible sort of analogs to any given collection. And having that, the good thing about AI is you can do these kinds of tasks at scale. And so maybe I wonder about how it promotes the accessibility of historically kind of underattended, or I don't know, like, historically inaccessible spaces. I could also see these tools being really useful for like universal design, like how to, I love seeing the examples of ChatGPT, like describe, the theory of relativity to like a 2-year-old, those kinds of prompts. Like I wonder like what it would mean if you could, like any collection that you could get, whether it's the Gutenberg Bible or what have you, like you can just look up and like you could like almost be a slider in like reading comprehension level, and you can like down here is like toddler level, and up here is like PhD elder or something. So those kinds of things I think could be really interesting to see, like how the assets themselves kind of can take on a life of their own, and you can kind of customize any given experience with any given archival collection.
Okay, you ready for this one to hear? Okay, looking ahead, what are the potential challenges and opportunities you foresee in using AI to document and disseminate the evolving cultural expressions of communities of color? And how can institutions like the Library of Congress address these challenges?
I feel like these are different questions than the ones you sent us. Can you repeat the question, please?
What are the potential challenges and opportunities you foresee in using AI to document and disseminate the evolving cultural expressions of communities of color?
One is that opaqueness. One is, that protection from not being seen. Another is if you opt in, the ownership of, it's your information, it's your medical information, it's your bio information, it's your credit history, it's your behavioral information. And I know that there were a few projects. I think Angela Benton had a project where she was making a platform where people could own and sell their activities online. I think those are some of the things. As we move forward, I'm interested in some of those things, like the ownership, not just analyzing our behavior and dumping it into a database and then putting us into a filter bubble and selling the things that we like back to us, or showing the things that we like back to us. But who's to say, I don't change in 7 months and I want to like tweak the filter and then have control over who has access to my persona that's being used out in the world. I mean, we're talking like science fiction, right?
All right, final question before we open it up. How can AI-driven projects at the Library of Congress not only preserve historical data, but also empower contemporary artists and community members to contribute their own narratives, thus creating a living, evolving archive?
We already have a living, evolving archive. So I guess, yeah, the part of the question is how would AI help that?
I think that's right. I think just acknowledging that there's always stuff that's worth bringing into the historical record. There's historical record. I mean, if anything, maybe there's maybe these tools can help us find connections across different narratives that maybe seem spectral on their surface. I think that's kind of what AI does in its essence anyway. It's just kind of like making connections between things that they don't seem like they're related. So I think that could be really a really fascinating way of understanding, let's say, how a Kara James Marshall painting has to do with I don't know, I'll just say the Bible again. I think that could be really interesting, and I think that sounds like maybe there's like a UI tool or something similar to the kind of the work that you're doing, like where I think it's almost in a way like playing with the historical record in and of itself and how you engage with it. In a way, you almost don't need to. AI doesn't even necessarily need to have as much of a role in sort of the artifacts themselves. I think that could be interesting to think through, like what is the user experience in engaging with the collections and with the artifacts.
In a similar way, when when I first put our database together, the Rap Almanac. So I'm from Queens, New York. So, and I'm of a certain big age where every Tuesday, me and my friends knew every rap album release that came out in the world, basically, at least in the United States. And it was like 7 to 10, 7 to 12, like new albums. Today, an album comes out multiple albums come out every day. So putting the database together and creating searches, it opened me up to what was happening, in Vallejo, California in 1989, right? So I'm reading these lyrics, I'm reading these names of rappers that I know E40, but other rappers that I don't know their names. So in a similar way, when we put this information in a system, it allows us to see more and to see like what Curry said, like to see the connections between things that we didn't think about connecting.
Right.
So in that case, in that way, it would be helpful.
Yeah. And even like allowing it to hallucinate. Like it'd be funny to see like what mistakes it makes. Like is there some like Baroque or Gregorian chant or something that because it like that for reasons that aren't perceptible to the human eye or ear, like is making some connection, some spectral connection to like a Nas verse. And I think that's where I think that kind of discovery, experience of discovery, I think I could see that being like a really fun way of engaging with the library.
Thank you, Tahir and Curry. Let's give Tahir and Curry a hand for their insightful responses. Sahar, do we have anything? Do we have some questions?
So a number of presenters today talked about learning from our elders. So this kind of relates to that too. As AI becomes more powerful and perhaps less obvious, how do you feel about the role of media literacy or AI literacy with the communities you represent, especially those who might be older and or less savvy about these technologies?
It's very important. That's what we teach at Rap Research Lab. Data literacy, media literacy. through, standards aligned lessons that are in middle schools, but also, in other fun ways, like, where there's an open bar and there's things happening, or in an exhibition where there's art on the wall, but there's an additional conversation about the technologies that were used making the art. I think is really important. I mean, for a number of reasons. One, in communities of color that I teach in and our platforms are in, this knowledge of technology is like has changed, my material conditions as as someone that grew up in Queens and has had the opportunity to be affiliated with like multiple institutions. So that's one way, but also the knowledge of how these things are made is also useful in creating resilience to not be grist for the mill, right? The more you know of how these data are collected and used and the impacts it has on your life, the more discerning you would be, and the more demands you would make on people that create policy.
Yeah. I think it's also important to note that like we can have an abundance mindset here. Like I think it's okay. Like I think there's enough room in the world for multiple forms of knowledge to exist. And for multiple interfaces, whether they be interpersonal or through or generative, machine learning, for those knowledges to be shared and stewarded. And so I think that there's still going to be a world in which my grandmother, 98-year-old grandmother, still has her encyclopedic knowledge of like pine trees and soil types because of her lived experience in the rural South. I think there's a specific sort of there's a specific space for those stories to be told and held, and also like she could also be interacting with these tools that I think over time will likely be easier and easier to use. We're kind of speaking in the 2024 tense, but I think we're going to be talking about these tools very differently in 2030 or even 2026. Right, and I think in the same way that in, let's say, 2011, that I don't know that I could have foreseen my grandmother at that time using an iPhone, and now she's texting and sending emojis. I foresee a similar arc, actually. I think it's just that it's so new, it still feels like a boogeyman a little bit, and so I think there's probably space for both of those, both elders to be still negotiating and sharing knowledge on their own terms, and also be dealing with these tools.
James, did you have a question?
How does misinformation play into what you're doing?
Misinformation as in like the output of the tools, or sure.
Am I the pessimist on the panel? Good grief. So if content creators are using AI to make posts, people to do blog posts, I don't know, content posts, writing, text, and they're using AI to make images, and we're doing everything's fan fiction. We can make up everything about anything and post it. How useful do we think the internet is going to be in 10 years as a source of truth? I mean, it was a problem before, right? Like you had to, and we're teaching our kids like how to be discerning about sources and how to check sources and, and that whole thing. But yeah, like how useful will the internet be as a source of truth in 20, 30 years from now? So, I mean, that's to say, yes, we're teaching kids now how to identify misinformation, but But misinformation isn't just like a static thing. There's like different ways that it gets created and distributed. So.
Yeah, I think that's right. I feel like there's like there's a current, even pre-AI, like atmospheric issue with misinformation. Like we saw that, obviously in election cycles, but also even on the scale of the everyday, where I was surprised to see students, undergrad students, like using Wikipedia as like their primary, like. Whereas I remember when I was coming through high school, which wasn't that long ago, where we were actively like, we knew at a certain point we had been coached that Wikipedia is this fluid, maybe sometimes wrong place, to source knowledge from. And not to say that the Britannica is the end-all be-all for knowledge, but there was a kind of haptic, that this is where I can go to get a certain piece of knowledge, and I can. There's a decent amount of reliability there. So there's a way, in a way, I feel like we kind of have to return. Like we have to like revisit the ethics, not the ethics, sorry, the methods between how we source knowledge to begin with, and just it almost feels like almost like a grassroots kind of like we have to kind of just be better at engaging with knowledge and engaging with facts, engaging with histories and knowledge. Because I think AI is basically just making it really inexpensive to make wrong stuff. Wrong pretty stuff. Yeah, that's right. And so, I mean, I think part of it almost feels to me like it's like a cultural question more than it is a technological one, if that makes sense. I think I saw a stat that Gen Z students are like at a higher risk for getting scammed than like boomers. So like that suggests to me that there's like a cultural like it's not so much that the AI is doing the damage. It's like there's something else in the water that we should be looking more closely at. I'm not sure what that is. There's probably a lot of things that's making something like that happen, but it seems to me that yeah. And then when I'm teaching, I would say like more directly pointed at my own sort of work. I'm also really whenever I give like workshops or things like that, I'm also really careful to stress that things that come out of an AI tool shouldn't necessarily be seen as like that's the end of the assignment. I tend to situate the AI or the product of an AI tool as the genesis, maybe for a larger idea, or as a production partner. And so I think that through that lens, I think that tends to like hint to them that not everything that comes out of these tools can be taken verbatim. Right. So I think kind of working through that sort of, again, that to me, that strikes me as like a cultural thing, like just maybe having less, in some ways having less trust in the tools and the interfaces that you're engaging with. But I think that's not that much different than, I don't know, 80% of the content that's on Instagram.
Okay, we are at time, so catch Curry into here in the hallway and ask them the hardest questions you can think of. Let's give them another round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
So in addition to our awardees, we also host a number of interns and junior fellows each year who join us for 10 weeks and participate in the creative and intellectual life of the program. Our interns bring fresh perspectives to our program, and they have been invaluable in helping us think more deeply about how we can foster innovative uses of digital collections that bring new artistic perspectives and highlight the experiences of communities of color. By continually reimagining archival use, our interns help CCDI and the Library of Congress achieve its goal of widening the path for how digital collections are used and reimagined by communities of color across the U.S. and its territories. Last fall, through the visionary leadership of our colleague Brian Fu, CCDI hosted our inaugural Archives, History, and Heritage interns, Ide Thompson and Madeline Toombs. Ide and Madeline worked together and with library staff to explore how the transcripts of the Mary Church Tarot papers could enable new forms of storytelling, visualization, and creative research. Over the course of 10 weeks, Ide and Madeline explored strategies for identifying names, places, events, and dates embedded in the collection transcripts, and by the end of the internship, Ide and Madeline had helped to build a digital interface that uses Mary Church Tarot's papers to generate creative possibilities with text and language. The Mary Church Tarot Project is a really good example of how we can use modern digital tools to create more user-friendly and interactive ways to explore historical documents. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by Ide Thompson, who recently graduated with his MFA in poetry, and who will tell us a little bit more about the work he did on the Mary Church Tarot Project. Please join me in welcoming Ide.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ide. I was intern for AHA, working on the Mary Church Tarot papers. 30,000 documents, really big collection of work. So it really was difficult for us to figure out how to really get down into it and create something that was manageable for research, but also for creative generative work as well. So one thing I did while with the project was I helped think about poetry, particularly erasure poems, and how those can be a really effective way of re-engaging with a text, of digging down into what is, I think, sometimes the heart of a piece of document. And this is from Mary Church Terrell's personal diary entry, and where she went on a excursion on a boat, and she just talks about it. And I really did this a poem to kind of highlight what I thought was the emotional center of the work. Also, this other poem here from an essay she wrote about Phyllis Wheatley's poem, and then response from George Washington. And I wrote a erasure poem that goes, George, writing to a young lady to whom he saluted as Miss Phyllis, she'd sent him a poem addressed His Excellency, the Commander-in-Chief of American Forces of the United States, writing to apologize for delaying her, for assuring her that neglect was only seeming and not real. For the poem he writes, I thank you most sincerely for your polite notice of me, elegant, enclosed, and undeserving may be, proof of your poetical talents, honor and tribute justly due you. I have not. I only mean to give the world this new genius. I have incurred vanity and nothing else. In public, to Cambridge, I shall be happy, a person favored by muses, whom nature has been liberal and beneficent. I am great, your obedient, humble servant, George. And through this erasure of the poem, we can get a sense of how Mary Church Terrell really is kind of getting us to really think about the relationship between George Washington and Phyllis Wheatley. And I think poetry has a really strong way of doing that kind of work. So this is what the interface actually looks like. So you see we have a picture of Mary Church Terrell Center. We do this collage form. What you would have is you go on the link and you can see these very short prompts taken from text in the collection. You get a very interactive timeline that gives you a sense of where the code is coming from, but also allows the code on its own to exist its own kind of, metaphorical moment. My own work is also inspired by looking at archival documents, thinking about the poem as an archive itself. And this is my poem, The Scent of Uncle Lou, or Hiring the Saltwater Hold. Oh, Uncle Lou, when you followed that silk cotton tree in what we thought was your blue hole water grave, weren't you being crowned and commanded with ascent to the sea bottom, where your crafty soul ascended, scourged clean by the eye of the portal light of Obatala, who sends for us justice, sent you down with hymns of repose, a trolley and iron point shoes to dance against the devil for the dead. Weightless Christ, black on the waves, say, I come to cut one movie in this place, in his face, and the words in your white heart throne, your voice broken in that bleakness, as a surging flame from your throat shot in chains of their bondage. And so sad, so done, you harrowed the underdark of that midnight sea, with the last sacred mystery remaining to be told, how you gather them souls bound for glory. You want to ride. Did you stand on a fishing line, or skin sad yourself into a great sea, but glistening, a core-bone ladder out of the sable salt water, night railroad for our God, ship for our Savior Jesus. And you can see poetry in this way is very able to really craft narratives and ideas. And I think the interface we developed from Mary Trish Terrell does that in a lot of ways. It gives new avenues looking for how do you really pick into the heart of a collection or document. Thank you.
So Madeline Toombs, who was Ide's colleague on this project, was not able to join us today. She's in Greece, and so she sent us a quote from Greece, and it says, "Working with the Mary Church Tarot Papers reminded me of the profound importance of examining Black activist archives, revealing them not just as historical figures, but as living, breathing individuals who navigated everyday decisions and made mistakes, enriching our understanding of their humanity and struggles." So let's give Ide and Madeline another round of applause. Building on the innovative work started by Ide and Madeline, we continue to explore new ways to engage with the library's digital collections. The CCDI team is currently working with 2 junior fellows, Janaya Peters and Jonathan Walton. Janaya and Jonathan are engaging with the methodological and technological approach of one of our artists/scholars in residence, Dr. Allie Martin, whose project, Sampling Black Life, Soundscapes and Critical Intention, we heard about earlier. Jonathan and Janaya are producing soundscape compositions using audio from the library's collections to explore a topic, community, or theme in depth. Their work extends the innovative spirit of the Mary Church Tarot Project by transforming audio archives into auditory experiences. These soundscapes will allow us to think about how we can create digital experiences that connect audiences with historical materials in unique ways. They also demonstrate how innovative interactions with digital collections can provide new avenues for public engagement. So our 2 junior fellows are here with us today to share more about their works in progress. So please join me in welcoming first Janaya Peters and then Jonathan Walton.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Janaya Peters. I'm a PhD student at UC Berkeley School of Information, studying information science with an emphasis in new media. This summer, I am working with the CCDI team and Digital Strategy Directorate to sample the library's digital collections and create a soundscape composition that encompasses Black life in its many facets. I am modeling the soundscape after the methodologies of Dr. Allie Martin, and my project considers Black life in relation to technology, a complex history marked by progress as well as regression and institutionalized violence. In 1794, Eli Whitney patented the cotton gin, though several instances of the machinery have existed prior to the 18th century. The cultivation of cotton could be segmented into 3 processes: retrieval, separation, and spinning. Retrieval required the manual picking of cotton from its source plant, which included both white plush fibers and prickly seeds. Separation required the uncoupling of these seeds from these fibers, for which the fibers will be sent for processing. Spinning wove these fibers into thread and yarn, which could form a variety of cloth materials. By this time, spinning had been partly mechanized by stocking frames and power looms, but the retrieval and separation of cotton was still costly and labor-intensive, and within the US was completed by enslaved persons. Whitney's cotton gin reduced the time it took to separate cotton fibers and seeds, making cotton a faster, viable cash crop for the US South. In this, plantation owners demanded more enslaved labor to plant, retrieve, and prepare the cotton for the gin. By 1800, the number of enslaved persons in the US was roughly under 1 million, but by 1860, the number of enslaved persons in the US was an estimated 3.9 million. Evidently, the cotton gin did not reduce demand for enslaved labor, but helped cement its role in the southern US economy. This soundscape project asks, how does the history of the cotton gin challenge the assumption that technological advancement leads to progress and innovation and reduced labor needs? How might these anecdotes shape our current understanding of technological integration? This project incorporates the oral histories from former enslaved persons and cotton gin operators to challenge narratives that technological innovation reduces labor. This project highlights the stories of Susanna Rebecca Wright Thompson of Oldham, Virginia, Aunt Phoebe Boyd of Dunsville, Virginia, and George Johnson of Mound Bayou, Mississippi, from the American Folklife Center's Voices Remembering Slavery, Freed People Tell Their Stories collection. It combines sound and pictures to examine the relationship between marginalized people and technology that standardizes forms of oppression and exploitation. Creatively, I am remixing audio materials by sampling snippets of audio feedback from the interviews to loop and recreate the whirring sound of the gin in motion. This sound will be heard recurrently through the soundscape as these stories are told over it. As we think about the gin as a technological and political artifact, I hope to highlight the ways that communities of color resist innovation that places them as an aggregate of invisible workers, and contextualize the role of resistance in current discussions about data labor, including emerging technologies such as generative artificial intelligence. This project centers CCDI's mission of engaging, imagining, and sharing artistic narratives of people of color using the library's rich collections. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. As stated, my name is Jonathan Walton, and I'm currently majoring in instrumental performance with a minor in business of media, entertainment, and technology at New York University. And I'm particularly interested in researching the intersection of sound art and design, archives, and technology, and most particularly within the arts communities. And as a cellist and music producer, I'm very excited to share the project that I'm working on this summer with CCDI. So this summer, I'll be working on a project where I'm creating a soundscape composition using audio from the Library of Congress's collections. My focus is on arts communities within United States and more specifically communities of color. And my goal is to weave together these diverse sounds into one big collage that illustrates that all groups are interconnected through art. And by exploring this universal connection, I want to emphasize that no one is truly free until we are all free. And my project aims to map through sound how different communities connect through their art as a celebration of multiculturalism and shared experiences. And so, building on the methodology of Dr. Ali Martin, our artist in residence here at CCDI, I've been very inspired by her project sampling Black life, soundscapes, and critical intention. Dr. Martin's work in soundscape and community engagement has shown me how sound can be a very powerful medium for storytelling and community connection. And her methods have inspired me to explore similar themes within the broader context of arts communities here in the United States. I've also been inspired by the German term Gesamtkunstwerk, which was first coined by Richard Wagner, a German composer. It translates to a total work of art, and it was heavily utilized by Wagner in the making of his various operas, which focus on not only the music and the singing, but also the drama, the acting, the set design, basically to create a total whole work of art in all different categories. And it's a perfect representation of what I want to achieve with my soundscape composition. I personally believe that art is one of the most powerful tools for self-expression and community identity. It provides very insightful commentary on how an individual and community can perceive itself and also express itself. My soundscape composition will use audio from various collections here at the Library of Congress to answer this question. How do communities of color express themselves through art and sound? I want my soundscape to resonate with anyone who enjoys art and the communities that create it, but I would particularly like my soundscape to speak to the very people who create these works that I'll be featuring. And to create the soundscape, I've been collecting various samples of music, spoken word, and interview audio for collections like the Chicago Ethnic Arts Project collection, and drawing inspiration from the Tony Schwartz collection, which also includes some soundscapes of its own. Here on my slide, there are a couple of images featured from the Chicago Ethnic Arts Project. And my goal is to bring these sounds together to form a sound collage that illustrates themes of history, creativity, and identity among cultures. I think one of the most exciting parts of this project is the ability to remix the digital collections from the Library of Congress by taking historical audio recordings and reimagining them in a contemporary context. I want to bridge the past and present, showing how these sounds can resonate in new ways today. Remixing allows us to honor the original context of these recordings while also creating something that's entirely new and different, one relevant to our current cultural landscape. I'm currently remixing and making my soundscape in a digital audio workstation. It allows me to manipulate these audio samples in various different ways, and I hope to create a soundscape that serves, as said before, a collage of the different pockets of creativity within the United States, making it both insightful and pleasant to listen to. And through my soundscape, I hope to reflect the identities, beliefs, and ideas of the various communities that I'm exploring. A recurrent theme in these materials is the resilience and creativity born out of displacement and resistance. With my soundscape, I hope to underscore the belief that to progress socially as a nation, we have to come together in unity. And as artists and communities come together in my sound collage, you'll hear the sounds of art being made, conversations, and a fusion of various musical genres and sounds from the digital archives. To summarize, my soundscape project embodies the spirit of Gesamtkunstwerk, a total work of art where diverse sounds and voices come together to form a cohesive whole. Through this project, I hope to celebrate the creativity and unity of arts communities, illustrating that our shared struggles and triumphs are what truly connect us. By utilizing the digital collections at the Library of Congress, we can enable storytelling that bridges different communities, connecting us through our shared histories and experiences, art and sound. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions from our in-person audience for Ide, Janaya, or Jonathan? Sorry, okay. Jamie, you want to go?
Hold on to remember. I think this is for everyone. How, if at all, has your personal art or research evolved as a result of your work with the library?
I'll go first. Okay, well, I guess my work has evolved from after working with the library because it gives me a lot of ideas of how the types of documents I can actually use, especially doing ekphrastic work and erasure project because I usually wouldn't necessarily do that. So I think it's given me a lot of awareness of how that can actually be a very positive and powerful tool, using already collected documents, especially from the library, as a way of reintroducing people to concepts. Yeah.
Testing? Okay. I'll say I've definitely learned a lot from Dr. Ali Martin and Anne, and really teaching me how to listen to ambient sounds and background sounds, as well as like the overarching narrative, to really tell a complete story of what is happening in these interviews, what is happening in the documents that I'm examining. So I think my attentiveness to like details or background details has really heightened, and I think they're just as valuable as what is being spoken narratively.
I think for me, when viewing the collections within the Library of Congress, I really feel the personal aspect of every image or interview or song that I find. And I think that's really impacted me and my art in a way that I can really speak to. It sort of reminds me of this idea of the alternate history, of which basically says there is one side of history. There's this one theory that history is made up of the important events, whereas alternate history focuses on the events of people that we might not talk about, the common people, if you could say. And I think focusing on that is just as important as focusing on the big events. And I feel like the Library of Congress's collections really brings that out in a very special way. And I can definitely say that I've started creating my art and my soundscape based on that.
Is this on? Okay. You might not be able to answer this question, I'm not sure, but I'd love to hear your reactions to it, which is, I'm on the LC Labs team. We work closely with CCDI, and we have been talking a lot recently of, just the idea of how we can use the experiments that we're working on to serve a new type of paradigm of use for the archives, one that's way more about like creative remixing, right? And this is something that's been happening for several years. But a question I have, and because I don't work at a university, I work at the library, and we don't have like a group of students, you know what I mean, that we see that we're not a part of a campus. My question for you is, do you think that like generationally a Gen Z kind of pattern of use is one that seems more less traditional in a sense of like writing a white paper at the end, right? Like you encounter an archive and you write a white paper, or you make a documentary film. It seems that there's a lot of very creative like remixing expressions that are coming from the ways that people are kind of metabolizing the archive. That's really, really interesting to see. And our team, is wondering what are ways that we can make the archive more accessible for those types of uses. So my question specifically is, do you feel that that's true? Like when you encounter the archive, that's something that you feel called to do? Or do you think really it's just, you see yourself as an artist, and so that's, you know what I mean, just the expectation of any type of material that you are working with?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but I think like it's really interesting thinking about how archives can really be reimagined. I would think it's what they're called like the archive, with arc and hive, and that being this way of really seeing the archive as living and generative and as something that's dynamic. And so through that process, I think it's really, really important to produce, tools like, like the interface that can really allow people to be like, okay, this is an archival document from XYZ year, but it's something I actually can take into my daily life, or take a snippet of and post it somewhere and use it to like think through the situation. And so I think by being open to that kind of use of archival resources beyond just what's physically on the page and what's accessible, through sound, through image, through remixing and reinterpretation, I think that allows a lot of students to really say that or feel that this work or this catalog of information is something they actually can be engaged with. Yeah, definitely.
I guess I'll say for me, like, as much as I consider myself an artist, I'm also a writer. So I love to write about process and document that process and how I change my methodology throughout. So I guess I'm not too like tied to like any particular methodology, but I think as long as this, whoever's interacting with the archives has a way of articulating how they came to a certain question and the references that led them to that like line of thinking, I think that is like a very effective way to kind of engage new generations while like sticking to those old practices. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ide in the fact that the archive is constantly changing and evolving. And I think it sort of reflects how our society is constantly changing and evolving as well. And even pieces within the collections that may have been added a while ago, I think they're always changing in context and meaning as sort of a reflection of the way that we are changing as groups, as individuals. And to go back to your point about Gen Z using the archives collections for their own projects, I would say that, at least in my personal case, I think the Library of Congress and their digital collections offers a lot of leeway and a lot of inspiration for how one could use the different pieces. I do think, though, there is a bit of a gap between the dates of many of the items within the collections and the very young audience of Gen Z that can kind of be a bit limiting. I've definitely experienced that with my own project. But so I would definitely say having items that reflect the times maybe a bit more precisely, I would say, could help. But I think overall, the library does contain a large variety of items that could lend to projects that aren't within the realm of the typical paper. And I think that's a very good thing. I think that allows for a lot of creativity and expression.
Hi. Thank you all for sharing so much. I think sharing your art and your passion and your creativity, it really touched me to see just the diversity and hear from you all. And so I'm wondering, because I imagine that any type of creative work is not easy, even if you really love it. And so I wanted to ask you all what part of either your art, your creative work, the research that you do, what feeds your spirit? What brings you joy? Because I think we've heard that today as these tender moments, these spaces of dismantling and achieving, and but what centers you? What feeds your spirit? Yeah.
I guess we'll change it up. I guess for me, it's the fact that, in a way, I'm one of the very few people doing this type of work, at least in reference to being a cellist and classical music. I would say in the classical music field, African American people are very underrepresented, and I've worked with a lot of different communities and different projects to sort of counteract that. But I think just being in the field and knowing that by being in this field, I can inspire other people younger than me to pursue something like this, or pursue some career where you might not be that represented, but that doesn't matter. You can be the first. You can make that change. And I think that's a very powerful thing. And I think that's what keeps me going, or at least is one of the main things that keeps me going.
Yeah. So for me, I think my work really gets me to spaces of euphoria when I engage you to understand not work just as musical, but also as archival. A lot of times work comes to me when I'm in the middle of cooking, or I'm walking, or listening to music. And coming from an oral culture like the Bahamas, where our language, Bahamian Creoleized English, isn't used in official settings officially, but it's always there. It's like recouping that kind of the importance of the language and showing people, yes, you can write a poem in this and it can represent your daily life. It can get at the cadence of everyday speech. You can turn what you say to your cousin or your grandmother into a song or to a poem. Is something that's really powerful. And when I can get a connection with my own communities, but also share it with other communities, and people can be like, yes, this is something that I can connect with. I think that's what really keeps me coming back to the work of poetry, that need to always say something, about what's going on in the world.
I'll say, growing up in a very musical district, like I played oboe for several years, and like one of the best things was like sharing and learning together with like fellow band students, and like that work has definitely influenced me in my current methodologies, as well as just thinking about how like art in practice is not just about optimizing, it's more so about sharing and like revising like your way of thinking and citing who inspires you, and then seeing how you can transform that and really incorporating that into your skill set. So yeah, I think that has really inspired me, playing instruments and theater and things like that, yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay, let's give our interns a round of applause.
All right, how we doing? Good, good, good. Again, for those who are new to Room or Zoom, my name is Maria McWhirter, Program Director for CCDI. I'm just going to give really, really brief remarks, closing remarks on behalf of my CCDI colleagues, Isabel, Kimber, Michelle, and Olivia. I'm closing us out with a huge thank you to the awardees, to the interns, and the panelists for your incredible work and for your generosity. And also to thank, I want to thank the in-person and virtual audiences as well. As I mentioned earlier, the full recording of this session will be available soon on loc.gov, loc.gov, and you can find it by doing a browser search for Summerfuse 2024. And finally, I want to remind you to check out the Libraries of the People website and the Other People blog to, to be updated in terms of what CCDI is doing, what we will be doing over the next 2.5 years. So thank you all for coming, and let's do a final applause for everybody. Woo-hoo! 333. Thank you.